I was saying that there's like 30 years of like intense work in schools, social and emotional learning, positive psychology, and yet, unfortunately, we see this decline in mental health.
Things like school shootings. And I think about these a lot in terms of how much anxiety I hear from kids all the time about these. Pandemic, school shootings. I mean, we didn't even talk about worries about the climate and what the planet will have for them when they hit adulthood. Input and output changes. I have to think we're actually helping bring the numbers down with our efforts. I'm surprised they're not higher than they are. Mark, we have to do a better job of marketing distress as tremendous opportunity because I think people are pretty scared of it right now.
Welcome to the Dealing with Feelings webcast. Today, I had the privilege and honor of talking with Dr. Lisa Damour. Lisa's a friend, but more importantly, she's a clinical psychologist who has written 3 New York Times best-selling books, including most recently, The Emotional Lives of Teenagers. She also co-hosts a great podcast called the Ask Lisa podcast, has been a consultant on movies like the big one Inside Out 2, and is just an all-around leading expert on emotional development among adolescents. She and I spoke about lots of things, but most importantly, what do we do about the rampant levels of anxiety in our nation today among youth? I just love the conversation, and I know you will too. Please share your comments about the episode, and also subscribe to our channel so that you can learn more about how to deal with your feelings. Welcome, Lisa.
Mark, thanks so much for having me. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, you too. So it's been a while. I forgot to mention to you, by the way, that I do the reunion talks every year for Yale, and you know who was one of my attendees?
I think my mom,
Yes.
who did not attend Yale because she couldn't in her time, but my dad did.
Oh,
So
really?
my
No, I
mom
like.
made a point of making it to your talk.
That's funny. And by the way, it's not easy. What should I say? It is easy to see how she is your mother. Uh,
We look a lot alike.
yeah.
We do.
Um, so I always like to begin with that simple yet profound question, which is, you've had a lot going on.
Mm.
Your books released, you've worked on movies, you've been running around. I see you everywhere. So, how are you feeling?
Tired. That is the answer. Um, and grateful. I have to say, I really do remember I get to do this. I get to do this. And if you had told me when I was thinking about becoming a psychologist that this is the kind of career I would get to have, I would have just been beside myself with excitement about it. And I really do try to pull out of the daily grind and remind myself, like, what an incredible opportunity I have to
Yeah.
think with people across so many domains about how we care for young people.
Yeah. It's funny. My good friend is someone you work with, which is Dacker Keltner, and I just spoke with him last week, and got to hear a little bit about his perspective, on everything that's going on, with the movie. But
Mhm.
before we jump there, I always like people to get to know the person. And so you just said you're grateful, which is incredible to be where you're at in your career, having influence, making a difference in people's lives. But I'm really curious to know, like, a little bit about your story because I don't even know it myself. How did you become a psychologist, and what got you to want to do what you do?
So, when I was 6, my family moved to London. And we moved there from Denver, where I spent most of my childhood because we ended up moving back to Denver before too long. And in the same week that we moved from Denver to London, a friend of a friend also moved from Denver to London. It was just this coincidence. Um, and that friend of a friend was going to London to study with Anna Freud to do child analytic training. And we, sort of wrapped her into our family. She was a graduate student at that point. And I spent a lot of time with her. My parents traveled quite a bit, so I would hang out with Carla when they were away. And I became completely fascinated by what she was doing, would ask her questions. She did an incredible job of answering my questions. And by the time I was about 7, I walked into our flat and I was like, yep, I'm going to do Carla's job. That's going to be my job.
Wow.
I know, an extraordinary, like, lucky thing early in life. And Carla and I are still close. She's well into her 70s. I'm well into my 50s. And that is what happened. And there was about 5 minutes freshman year of college where I thought maybe I'll be a pediatrician.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't really enjoy intro bio all that much. And
Uh,
so um, I I knew early on, and then I got my undergraduate degree at Yale, and I worked with the Yale Child Studies Center as an undergrad, and then as after I graduated. And I feel really fortunate that I've known for so long that this is what I would do.
that's amazing. And so, given that we're both psychologists and study emotions and
Mhm.
both have written books on emotions and emotional development, I'm always curious to know, like, how would you describe, and I hate to do this to your mother, how would you describe, and your father, what would be the title of the movie that you would use to describe your emotional development?
Oh, that's a really, I wish I had a little more time to get ready. Okay, the title of a movie would be You Can Do This.
Wow, that's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, I was raised in a family where emotions mattered. If I was weepy, I got a loving response. And in a way that I think we still need plenty of in this day and age of like, okay, get it together. Get it together. And I tell a story in Untangled, my first commercial book, about being a 10th grader and having a trigonometry teacher who I did not like. And every afternoon and evening, I would complain about this guy, in florid detail to my mother mostly. And she listened, listened, listened. And then I think when she got bored of it, she finally said to me, there will be nowhere on your high school transcript to indicate that you did not like your trigonometry teacher. So you're going to have to figure this one out. And I think that was brilliant on her part. Absolutely brilliant. And so I feel like I had the benefit of a lot of warmth and also high expectation that I could manage uncomfortable experiences.
Hmm.
Um, and that there was value in emotional durability. Um, and that would be what I would say.
I love it. And it actually brings up, probably something that both you and I are witnessing in the world right now, which is this dilemma, controversy about teaching emotion skills. You've got some people saying, that it's a waste of time and people are talking about their feelings too much, and that's not helpful. And then you get other people saying that it's about controlling people. I'm just curious from your perspective, like, how do you respond to the resistance,
Mm.
that we get, in bringing this work to schools and communities?
Well, I will tell you, I think some of how it's taught, which isn't how you recommend, but some of how it's taught, I actually think the resistance is well founded. And I'll
Yeah.
tell you what I mean. I am a little worried about what I would call pathology forward approaches to teaching about emotions.
Yeah.
This is a very well intentioned movement that is happening in some middle and high schools where we're going to help kids by teaching them all about depression and all about anxiety disorders and all about fill in the blank. Very well meaning, we are seeing early data that this may not work the way we want it to be working
Hmm.
and may actually leave kids feeling worse and this is the piece I worry about, feeling that they're now responsible for this. That if they or their friends are struggling with depression, that is now, we've taught you, go forth and manage one another. That is not what we want them to think.
Yeah.
So I actually think to the degree that we're going to question the teaching of emotion in broad scope in schools, I'm okay with some questioning about teaching about pathology. I do believe the value in teaching about pathology is to do a quick summary of if you or a friend are depressed slash suicidal, eating disordered, anxiety disordered, engaging in risky behavior in a dangerous relationship, let the adults know. We are here for you. We are,
Mhm.
the ones who can help get you or your friend to the care you deserve. So it's not that you can't talk about pathology, but I think you want to talk about it from the standpoint of that crosses a line into the place where adults are here and need to be alerted. Then there's the kind of emotion talk and teaching that you bring to schools and that I want schools to be doing, which is around normalizing the
Hmm.
broad range of human emotions, and focusing on coping. And that I feel is absolutely essential, both because the culture has not normalized at this point discomfort, even though it is an incredibly important part of life and natural to being human.
Yeah.
And also because given that discomfort is a done deal, we got to just focus on coping. And there's
Right.
healthy coping and unhealthy coping. And our job is to make sure that kids come into, all of the challenges they're going to face with skills for coping well.
It's funny you say that because I agree 100%. And at the same time, I want to share with you something that just happened yesterday. So I'm giving this speech for Mental Health, World Mental Health Day. And somebody comes up to me at the end of my speech and he goes, I realized, and I've been thinking about this a long time, like I don't want to experience when I'm experiencing excitement, I'm not going to like attach to it. And when I'm sad and down, I'm not going to attach to it. And the goal is to like never have these positive emotions and never have the negative emotions. And I was like, I don't think you were listening to my presentation. Like, why would you not want to feel?
Yeah.
Like, so what is the goal here? And it made me realize how important it is to clarify these things that we teach, and as you know, in my work, permission to feel is like permission to feel all emotions. And life is a roller coaster ride. And there's going to be the ups and the downs and the ins and the outs. And, the way I think about emotion regulation is that if that feeling, let's say it's an unpleasant one, is very intense and long in duration, you need some real strategies.
Yes.
Um, and for the most part, thank goodness, we go through the day, up and down, in and out, but we're not like, you know, pathologizing, every emotional experience. And does that align with your thinking?
100%. And I would be as quizzical actually about that, what that person was trying to communicate, other than that somehow that person has been made to feel that emotions are somehow compromising, right? That they get in your way of reason when you and I know they actually can inform reasoning and decision making really well. But I do think so much of being a human being is just riding the waves, finding the ways to, stay on track, even as you're buffeted by one emotion after another. Also, I will say in my work, I've paid more and more and more attention to all of the subtle ways we are constantly regulating without even being conscious of it. A little distraction here, a little comfort there. And I would say for me in caring for teenagers, one of the things I feel really excited about doing is helping teenagers and adults have a lot more respect for all of the highly adaptive ways that kids are coping that may not look recognizable, like listening to music, cuddling
Hmm.
the dog, wanting to go back to bed for a little while. These are all fantastic. Nothing wrong with any of these. They don't always get celebrated as the healthy coping that they are.
Interesting. Yeah. One thing that I've been really interested in getting people's perspectives on, and yours in particular, is related to all of what we've been speaking about. But, we're both around the same age, both been running around the world getting people to talk about their feelings and learn strategies to regulate them. You coming at it from a clinical background, I'm coming at it from like an education researcher kind of perspective. And, you know, I was saying that there's like 30 years of like intense work in schools, social and emotional learning, positive psychology, etc. And yet, unfortunately, we see this decline in mental health.
Mm,
And it's a conundrum for me because, in the schools that I work with and the places where you do work, we do see benefits. We do. We have the research to show that. But at a larger scale, we're not, we're seeing poor mental health.
mhm.
And I just wonder, what do you think is happening in our world that we're putting so much emphasis on the work, but yet it doesn't seem to be having the impact?
So, one question we should ask is, are we having impact? Would it be quite a bit worse without these efforts?
That's
And,
true.
and I think we need to be open to that possibility because if we look at what young people have been up against in the last 20 years, these are some pretty major forces. So, starting just with the pandemic, right? I mean, horrible for kids and horrible for teenagers, horrible for everybody. But, if you've only been on the planet for 14 years, a year and a half of your life that you are basically grounded for no reason. Like, that's a big deal. And then we look at things like school shootings. And
Hmm.
I think about these a lot in terms of how much anxiety I hear from kids all the time about these. I have cared for plenty of kids who go to school. They've never been, thank God for them, involved in a school shooting. But every slamming door they hear in the course of a school day, their anxiety goes through the roof. And I think there's a broad conversation we need to be having about the impact on everybody's mental health for this to be an ongoing threat for young people, whether or not they happen to be in a school where there's been a horrible event.
Well, there was, 50 years ago, there was none, and last year there were 80.
Yes.
80 is not a little number. And so every time you turn on the news, you're hearing about that. Even if you're in a quote unquote safe neighborhood, you're still going to be activated.
You are. And I hear from teenagers that they walk into class and think, how am I going to escape this class if I have to? The wear and tear of something like that, I think, can hardly be measured, but we need to take it very seriously. Then there is what I would call input and output problems that have changed pretty dramatically in the last 20 years. So I am not wholesale against social media. I'm not a fan of problematic social media, which we can define and we can work with minimizing. Social media, I think once kids are in high school or older, has a lot of upsides and we know it. It is still a tremendous amount of input to exist in a digital world. And kids are metabolizing so much more content than we ever were, which is taxing.
Hmm.
And then the output expectations for kids have gone way, way up. I would never get into Yale today. I know who I was in high school. I know what was on my application. They would like use it for scrap paper these days. I promise you. And so if you just combine, I mean, that's the short list. Pandemic, school shootings. I mean, we didn't even talk about worries about the climate and what the planet will have for them when they hit adulthood. Input and output changes. I have to think we're actually helping bring the numbers down with our efforts. I'm surprised they're not higher than they are.
Yeah. So now this is a great segue. Like a lot of what, we're both in kind of developmental psychology. You can take a Bronfenbrenner model of like, we got this kid here and we've got, family and schools and we've got communities and we've got other organizations and we've got societal things. A lot of the things that you're bringing up, are larger societal things. And, we both spent a lot of time thinking about the concept of emotion regulation. And so, from your perspective, you have that. A friend of mine, actually a close colleague, um, lives in a town where there was a school shooting, has two daughters in high school, and they are both really anxious. And like you said, there's a door that slams, and they're triggered. I got sent a picture of a classroom where there was a threat, and they like the kids put all the desks and blockaded, the door to their classroom, and so that is scary for kids. And I get asked this question all the time, like, how do you help a kid who is in that situation manage their feelings? And I'm curious to know where do you go with that?
Well, I'll tell you what I say when I get asked this question, but I really want to know what you say because I find it to be actually the hardest question I ever get asked. Like, what am I supposed to say to my kid? So I say a few things. One is I say their anxiety is well founded. This is a very good example of anxiety being a healthy protective emotion that alerts us to potential threats. If your child, it's terrible that they are feeling anxious about this in an ongoing way, but that's not the wrong response by any measure. It's entirely appropriate, I think. Then there's the issue of like, okay, so is my kid just supposed to be anxious all the time? Right? That's a terrible thing. I then often, when this question arises, I will say, I'm going to give you a very inadequate suggestion. I know it is inadequate, but it can help some kids feel better some of the time. I'm not satisfied, though, with this answer, which is that when we look at the data of school shootings, the vast majority are kids within the school who are known quantities. And it happens often that those kids broadcast their plans.
Hmm.
And I think that adults need to take very, very seriously the kind of information that kids are picking up from their peers and trying to share with adults. And so what I will say, and again, I find this is not the answer to this problem, but it is one thing that we can offer, is to say, if you have any worries about any of your classmates, let the adults know. We will
Hmm.
take you very seriously. And I think kids do take comfort in that because it gives them some modicum of control.
Yeah.
I think, so you met my mother. My mother works in politics. And she will sometimes reach out to me after a school shooting saying, you need to write something to help people feel better. And I say to her, Mom, I don't want people to feel better. I want this to change. And people being uncomfortable about this is the best shot we have at this changing, to use a weird choice of language. And I'm like, Mom, you're in politics. This is where I think the change can happen.
Hmm.
It doesn't fall to psychologists to make this right. And in fact, if I were able to make everybody okay with this, I wouldn't do it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a really important point. And, that's coming at it from part of, making people long term less anxious is changing policies that, get in the way, or that are unsupportive of healthy children's development. I just wrote about this recently in terms of like, it's not always the job of the individual, right, to deal with their feelings. We have to create context where we're less activating. And this is just a good example of that.
So, what do you say when people ask you about this? What's your answer?
I do a similar thing that you do. I come at it from the perspective, one of my mentors is James Gross, who of course, is an emotion regulation researcher. And there's like a modified version of like his theory, is that there's three levels to dealing with feelings in many ways. There's like, if I could change the situation, right, I would do it,
Mhm.
right? If I could eliminate the problems that are causing me to have this stress and anxiety, you go for it. And you can do that for a lot of things, right? Like if you have a friend who drives you crazy, just don't hang out with them. Don't hang out with them anymore.
Well, problem solving is emotion regulation. We have
Yeah,
to help people remember that.
exactly. The second is, the people that I'm hanging out with, are they making it worse or are they making me feel more comfortable? And do I surround myself with people that are like healthy co-regulators or people who, activate me even more? And then, the third, the third has like a zillion pieces to it because it's, can I shift my thinking? Can I, change my cognitions? Can I talk to myself in a way that says, Mark, right now, you are safe. Um, no one can get in this classroom, God forbid, right now, you are pretty safe. Okay, yeah, I am safe right now. Everybody's got, we have access to the outside community to know what's happening. Okay, police are here. Okay, let me take my breaths. Let me, you know, sit with my close friend, and let's distract ourselves or let's do something, to help our systems kind of be more at ease. And so that's the way I think about it. There's not one of my, that quote that is attributed to Viktor Frankl, between stimulus and response, there is space, and that space is our power to choose our response, and our response lies our growth and freedom. That, in the end, we have the ability to shift the way we see things if we can. And so, ideally, I like the world to be a better place. You know, um, my hope is that people have really healthy, positive connections so that you feel not alone with your feelings. I love that expression. You know it probably, never worry alone.
I love that expression.
It's just great because it's like no one should be sitting alone ruminating. It's just not, sitting alone and problem solving is okay, but sitting alone ruminating, not great. And then doing the things that we need to do for ourselves, whether it be taking a walk or working on our self talk. So, obviously, that's like, there's much more to it and a lot of practice necessary. I'm curious now, just to jump from there to, you got a chance to work on a film that has had a lot of impact. People are talking about it a lot, as kind of, we're reaching the zeitgeist, in terms of emotions are in our culture. And what would you say, are the top lessons learned in term for children and parents from a film like Inside Out 2?
Well, first of all, I'll say it was a huge honor to get to work on it, and the folks at Pixar are just brilliant, and we're a huge pleasure to work with. Um, the film itself, I think we couldn't need it more. The timing is perfect in that, it's what we've talked about. There's a lot of discomfort and fear about emotions, especially uncomfortable ones. And what I love about the film, Riley has 9 emotions. Only one of them is considered a comfortable emotion. The other 8 are uncomfortable, hard to have, and they are all treated as normal and they're all treated as part of the team. And so this I think is an essential message right now that we really do need to help adults and kids get used to the idea that discomfort is actually part of what keeps us safe and helps us navigate the world.
Now, you have an expression or a saying that I remember at the conference that you attended or spoke at, around helping the questions that you would ask yourself about, is it uncomfortable? Is it right? So could you go into that, please?
Sure. So um, we are in this moment where sometimes adults and kids can just pull up short and get very anxious in the face of discomfort. And I like to ask myself, I like to ask people I'm caring for, is the situation uncomfortable or unmanageable? And what I like about that construction is that comfortable is not on the table. We just want to know, is it uncomfortable or unmanageable? And there are times when young people find themselves in truly unmanageable situations where, what we're asking of them is unfair, what's before them is more than can reasonably be expected of them. Most of the time it's just uncomfortable. And then, of course, this is where all of our terrific options for helping bring feelings down to size come in and make something slightly more manageable. But we do ourselves and our children a great harm when we say everyone can move forward once we are comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't get to be very comfortable very often. And and I know that the kids who can move forward while uncomfortable are the ones with the most options.
Yeah.
The kids who need it to be just so before proceeding can do very little.
I mean, it's a big concept that you're promoting here because I've seen, in the last 20 years, the it either goes to like tough love
Mm.
or the opposite, which is, I don't like that my kid is uncomfortable. I want my kid, there's so many pressures in the world and, you can't add any more stress to my kid's life. And I'm thinking like that's stressful. But, nevertheless, there is that kind of like weird, which is kind of like the avoidance of the emotion, which by the way is something I'm finding a lot, especially around parenting, which I know you do a lot of work in. Interestingly enough, in my newest work, what I found was that a lot of parents are kind of afraid of asking their kids about how they're feeling because they're going to be kind of overwhelmed by what they're hearing and not know what to do about it,
Mm-hmm.
which
Mm-hmm.
is, I mean, very disheartening. Um, and I think part of the challenge is that the mindset is the fix it mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm curious as I say this, where do you go in terms of your thinking about parents working with their kids on healthy emotion regulation?
I go about 4 places at least. One is one thing I've noticed, and I haven't shared this with anybody, it's just you brought it up. I think some of the heavy emphasis that people perceive about emotion that is overdone. I am hearing from kids a bit of a backlash at some kids, a bit of a backlash at home, where the parents are like, "You're fine, you're fine," and I do wonder if that is an unintended consequence of trying to have more meaningful conversations about feelings. Is that
Mm-hmm.
it feels too much for some families. I think on your point about parents wanting to prevent distress because the world's already so hard, what I think our job is to help in those moments is to help parents appreciate that that means they're going to lose an opportunity. And the opportunity they're losing is for them to model for their kids that we can take challenging experiences in stride. And it is as corny as the day is long, but I think it's so important to go back to the metaphor of like when a kid falls down and scrapes their knee. They look at their knee and then they look at their parent's face.
Mm-hmm.
And they are looking for their parent to give them a read on how bad the situation is. And most parents get it really right in these moments. They are very instinctively, they're like, you're okay. You're okay. Even if they actually feel quite anxious. Because they know that if they go, the
Mm-hmm.
kid will fall apart. And so that you're okay, I see it and you're okay moment between parent and child, caregiver and child, I think of that as like a durability building moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
I see quite a bit of pain and I am not unduly frightened. Helps the child to think, okay, I can be in quite a bit of pain and apparently I'm going to get through this. So if you don't let your kid get upset in front of you, you actually rob yourself and the child of the chance to build durability in that way. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that the last thing I will say has to do with it was the last point you made. I'm trying to bring it back here. Um, about talking with kids about feelings and parents feeling overwhelmed. That if they ask, they're going to open a Pandora's box and they're not going to know what to do. And I think there we can be most helpful to adults around kids to say, actually, all the kid wants is very little, just for you to listen. They actually don't want you to fix it, almost ever. Your job, first and foremost, in those moments is to listen with tremendous intent, very carefully, and then perhaps when they get to the end of it, to offer some empathy and see if that doesn't do the job. Most of the time it does. And again, it's that durability building moment of like, I can listen with full focus to how rough your day was, say to you, oh man, that stinks,
Mm-hmm.
and assume that that will pretty much get you back on track, ready for the, rest of the day.
Relatedly, and you're kind of like you're pulling out my newest research into this conversation, which is what I find are the top three characteristics that we're looking for. The first one is non-judgmental. It's like everybody just feels judge for their feelings, for the way they look, for the way they're what they're interested in, whatever it is. And so like can the parent just be non-judgmental? And I get resistance in that too. It's like my job is to be judgmental. My job is to like push, push, push. And I'm like, maybe not. The second is listening. And the third is the empathy and compassion. Nowhere in the research, and I've done now, this is a study with about 25,000 people, nowhere does anyone say problem solver, brilliant, smart, fixer. It's not what people want, which I think is really interesting in terms of, you talk about durability, that if we're, and I found this in my work, which is early on, which is that like for teachers, especially in schools, I just want to get them done with the things so we can go back to learning. And I'm like, I understand that. So if they just apologize, but where's the skill building? Or if you just dismiss it, like, what are they learning? And so, but by being the good listener, right, you're also asking good questions, getting people to think about it. How the compassion is not just um, saying how much you care; it's finding out what their needs are and helping them find, the strategies that work best for them. And so, there's so much more, as you use the word durability, that's kind of in skill building that happens when you provide that, the surroundings that you're talking about, with whether it be parenting or teaching. Does that resonate?
Absolutely. And, that only happens in the context of distress. When everything's going great, you're just having a good time.
Yeah,
It's when a kid is struggling that this world of opportunity opens up for us to help them build confidence in their ability to withstand discomfort, for us to actually connect in a meaningful way. Some of those powerful connections aren't made when you're having a good time. They're actually made when you're in pain and someone's there for you in just the way you want them there.
for sure.
And so I think, Mark, we have to do a better job of marketing distress as tremendous opportunity
Yeah.
because I think people are pretty scared of it right now.
Well, because they've been, I think it's that even that term emotional. that means out of control. It means, not able to think clearly. It means not able to problem solve. And I always tell people that, I've had challenges with anxiety for 50 years. Um, and I've just learned how to live with it better. I've learned how to use it wisely. I have a new relationship with it. I say hello to it. And I just don't oftentimes, sometimes it gets the best of me, like anything, but most of the time, I've built I have a toolbox, of strategies, and so I think we can change our relationship with emotions too.
We can. One thing I want to just acknowledge for parents, especially of adolescents, because that's really where I live, is in the adolescent space.
Hmm.
It's very frightening right now to be the parent of a teenager if you read any newspaper or any headline anywhere. The media has gone down a very clickbaity road about teenagers, and I thought it would have died down by now, but it has not. There are persistent, very, very worrisome headlines about teenagers. And what I am saying to parents increasingly, I'm like, if you're going to read the article, read from the bottom. Because what almost invariably happens is there's some terrifying headline and a terrifying first paragraph and then second paragraph. And then in the lower paragraphs, they basically walk it all back.
Hmm.
Actually, the data don't support this. There's vast controversy. This might even be okay. And so I think it's so hard right now if you are raising a teenager who, I've cared for teenagers for 30 years. They have meltdowns. They have always had meltdowns.
Right.
It was scary before the headlines took this turn. And I have so much compassion right now for parents who are looking at their 13-year-old having a full on meltdown in the kitchen, as 13-year-olds have always done, and looking at headlines saying social media is destroying your child. And if not that, then 14 other things are going wrong. I think it's probably pretty hard to feel like, you know what, my kid's having a rough day. I'm here to listen, help him get through it. I think that has made much more challenging than it used to be.
What are your thoughts about like the lack of granularity in terms of how we feel? Because in my research, what I find is that people tend to have horrific emotion vocabularies.
Mm.
We tend to know the words that represent strong emotions, like I'm anxious, I'm depressed. We don't tend to use words like I'm feeling a little hopeless or a little despair or disappointment or down or sad or I'm a little uneasy or, I'm feeling nervous, or it always seems to go to the extreme emotion. And I just wonder, if the contagion effects of constantly talking about the strong unpleasant emotions, and then people start thinking, oh, that's what it must be for me, when maybe it's actually something less intense.
Mhm.
Any thoughts about that?
Well, so you and I both know the research on the power of granularity, that speaking about emotions in more specific terms makes the act of language that much more powerful to regulate them. So there's real value in having a very thick thesaurus when it comes to emotions. Um, I think we find ourselves in a historical time when diagnostic terminology is used in a very elastic way on social media platforms. In the New
Mm.
York Times, the New York Times does this. They get a CDC finding where there's sadness and hopelessness reported, and they have a headline that says depression. Those are three different things. So, this is not just kids, this is the world that we're in. Here's what I have found to work very well clinically. Rather than fighting people about whether they truly have anxiety disorders or
Mhm.
depression, there's no value. When teenagers say to me, I feel anxious, I will say, tell me more. And then they describe the scenario. And one thing I'll tell you, Mark, is I often think when teenagers say, I feel anxious, they mean I don't feel calm.
Mhm.
But there's, as you and I know, a lot in the not calm bucket.
Yeah.
So I say, tell me more. And I listen very carefully with my thesaurus in mind.
Mhm.
And then they tell me, oh, I've got this big game coming up. I've got this, Friday night's going to be really busy. Could be fun, but I don't know. And I'll say, oh, you feel apprehension. Oh, it sounds like you're feeling excited
Mhm.
and maybe a little nervous. And I've never had that be poorly received. It's actually like I'm listening so carefully, I'm going to see you and raise you. Like, we're going to get even more specific than the generic you began with. So I wouldn't go so far as to say I try to blow right past it, but I try to take it as like the door's open. Now let's just get down to some
And
details.
sometimes you get confirmed that it is
Yeah.
anxiety.
Sometimes
And
they're like, I can't sleep. And, I've grossly overestimated this threat and I've grossly underestimated
right,
my ability to manage it. And like, you are struggling with anxiety. You are using the right
exactly.
term.
Yeah. So that labeling it, you're getting at here, which is really helping parents and kids themselves to understand, like really make a clear connection between the cause of the emotion, and when you really get at that appraisal or what's behind it, that leads to kind of more to better labeling, which then could lead to you know now we can figure out the strategy. If it's apprehension about going out on a Friday night, we got something to work on.
Now we can tackle that.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I appreciate that. I do want to go back though for a minute, because we spend so much time talking about the unpleasant or negative emotions. And one thing from our mutual friend Dr. Keltner, um, is like there is something to experiencing pleasant emotions. And I'm someone who our mood meter. I'm not a yellow guy. I'm a green red guy. I'm either calm or I'm kind of overwhelmed. I'm not really someone who lives in the blue, down, disappointed. Nor am I someone who is like Mr. like happy go lucky. Even when I try to be, I feel awkward. But I like the feeling of that. And I do have things that bring me there. And I've been working on savoring those
Hmm.
as a strategy, like being with, as you said, unpleasant or negative emotions, right? That's a signal something is wrong and you got to do something about it. Pleasant emotions, you don't really process the same way. And so you don't think about necessarily like, what do I do to preserve this feeling?
Hmm.
And I'm wondering, in your work with kids, or parents, do you ever switch it and say things, having them work on that savoring, and just what do you think about the pleasant emotion side of things?
Oh, I love this. Well, it's funny. I just have to share, so one of Docker's main areas right now is awe.
Mm-hmm.
And I live in the suburbs of Cleveland, and we were in the center of the path of totality for the solar eclipse this year. And so we had 4 minutes of totality in my backyard, and we had a party, and I get goosebumps just telling you about it. It was extraordinary, and in some ways, something so cool like that, something big and cosmic, like it just takes you over. You don't even have to go there, and it's sort of neat to watch. How we're built to just go there. In terms of savoring the pleasant, for me, it tends to come up when talking with teenagers about how they cope with distress. And they have highly elaborated systems that often involve pleasures and comforts. Food matters a lot to them,
Mm-hmm.
tactile comforts, their pets, their beds, their facials, their bubble baths matter a lot to them. The other thing that kids turn to for relief, but I think is also a tremendous pleasure, bluntly, reruns. Kids love watching the same things over and over. I can like watching the same thing over and over.
They do.
And I will spend time trying to kind of bold and highlight these choices that they make and the wisdom of these choices. So when we talk about reruns, I was actually just with some teenagers 2 days ago, and I was asking them like, what do you like to watch? And I was with high schoolers. I was like, okay, who's watching Octonauts? This is a little kid show. Several juniors raised their hand. Same with Barbie Dreamhouse. Same with Phineas and Ferb. And what we talked about is they know they're going to like it. They know how it's going to end. There's no surprises. It's like pleasure in a bottle. Like just they
Mm-hmm.
know it's going to go well. And so they use all of these strategies, and in my context, often to manage distress and manage it very effectively, as far as I'm concerned. And what I then talk with them about, I say, and often these are very intense schools and very intense kids. And I will say, who here, whether you're cuddling your dog or watching Octonauts or, letting yourself do some baking because it makes you happy, feels guilty while doing it? And a huge percentage of them raise their hand and say,
Mm.
I feel guilty. And so I say, I don't, that we can fix. And I make the argument, if you're going to work hard at things or go through hard things, you're going to need to recover. And this is recovery, and recovery is valuable. And you are undermining your own recovery by tainting it with guilt. So keep doing all these things, take the guilt away. So that's for me clinically where the question of like savoring and pleasure comes in, is that kids are instinctively doing these pleasant things, but not able to allow themselves the full enjoyment, because so many of the high schoolers who come into my world are feeling like, but I should be studying. Or their parents are
Mhm.
saying, why are you watching Octonauts?
Yeah.
So I think that that's how it comes up in my work.
Yeah, and it makes me think about, the students, that I teach. And, it's like taking a walk is a waste of time, you know. As a matter of fact, we did a randomized trial of a mindfulness-based intervention, and 70% of the students dropped out.
Yep.
And it wasn't because of anything other than this is a waste of my time. This is not going to get me into grad school. This is not, like, and I keep on, I push and I say, do you know about the research which shows that, when you're taking that walk, some of the best ideas are going to come up for you? That like sitting in the library at 2 o'clock in the morning, like going through every book, like, and, is not going to actually help you have that creative process. But it's been, we've been training students for so long about push, 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 and almost having some space to be free and just like a Dacker's all walk, is just it's like a whole like level, that they're not willing to even engage with.
Mhm.
Getting at like let's start earlier and get people to learn these things and practice them.
And have the adults around them endorse those things.
Exactly. Lisa, so I'm curious, you're a psychologist. You've been teaching these things for, as you just said, 30 years. If I were to ask you, what are your go-to strategies? What do you use to support you and when you're feeling, I mean, my hunch is that you're human and you feel anxious sometimes and overwhelmed.
Yes. So, like everyone, ideally, I've got some options. Depends on the situation and where I'm at. Um, I have incredible friends. And I have one friend I'm thinking of in particular. We've been close for more than 30 years. We're both pretty anxious. We're both highly conscientious. And we both use each other as a check because we trust each other totally. And so if I'm starting to feel spun up about something, I can actually call her and she will say, that is actually not a thing.
Hmm.
And I can believe her. I don't believe many people,
Hmm.
but I trust her. So that's actually a really, really key
Yeah.
um, force for me.
Having that trusted friend, the person that's not going to be judgmental, they're going to listen.
Oh,
Yep.
and she'll tell me if it's a thing, and I know that. And so I can trust her when she says it's not. I exercise a lot because it makes me happy. I grew up in Colorado. I love being outdoors. Um, and I do it in a way that's increasingly pleasant as I age. A lot of walking, a lot of yoga, things that I can enjoy and really savor as I do it. Um, I love TV. TV's good these days. It's really good. And so I don't watch a lot, but I'm very selective and I get to be. And I use it every night as a way to kind of wind down, change my mental channel, so to speak, from work to quiet. I found in the pandemic I had to be much, much more deliberate about the inserting some space between my work day and I was actually unable to sleep unless I had ways to really remove myself from the things that were weighing on me. TV, I've always loved, and then increasingly I read at night
Hmm.
in bed.
And
Um,
what about your, do you have any go-to phrases or any self-talk
mm,
strategies that you like to use?
you know, it's funny. I don't know if this is exactly what you have in mind, but I am surprised how often, quite unexpectedly, I'll hear myself say to myself, "Okay, you can do this. You can do this," and I will say it out loud. And it's often when I am like needing to get something done and kind of feeling sluggish, or I don't want to do it. It works. It works. A little
There's
personal
good
trainer.
research on it, actually.
I
That's
know, I've actually seen some of it, and it like, and you do have to say you, not
you
I.
have to say
You
you
can do
exactly.
this. And I I was doing it, and then I came across the research, which made me feel like I had cracked the code on my own.
Yeah,
How about you? What do you do?
I do very similar things. I don't watch as much TV. I think I just did that early in my life and I got saturated with it. But I do a lot of exercise. I become like, I've been making a joke about, I've just finished my next book. And, whenever I would, just be completely overwhelmed by like, it's not good enough, or I would start, like this chapter is not really that great. I would just put it down and go work out.
Mhm.
And that was what I would do. And I just take a walk, do exercise. And I remember thinking to myself, I may not finish the book, but I'm going to be in the best shape of my life.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's a good outcome too.
Sure. Take it.
I did end up finishing it because, but anyway, I'm a very cognitive kind of guy. And so I catch myself with a lot of, you know, negative self-talk, you know, and I have learned that I need to have go-to phrases. That's why I asked you. For me, it works to have, like, I know that one in my pocket, for example, when I'm completely overwhelmed. Given that I have a background in Eastern philosophy, I have a go-to phrase, which is, Marc, you know this feeling is impermanent.
Mhm.
And for some reason, it just reminds me that there's been rainy days, there's been sunny days. Today's a rainy day, but I've had a lot of rainy days in my life, and I've had a lot of beautiful sunny days. And so it's okay.
Mhm.
This feeling is there, but it's not going to be there forever. And I feel that noticing that, the ephemeral nature
Mhm.
of that intense emotion is important to me. But for anger, for example, it's something totally different. I don't usually say that. I'm usually something like, Marc, is this really going to matter next week? It's so like I don't know if you find this, but I think also what we were getting at earlier in our conversation with children and adolescents and even us adults, we adults, is that tailoring the strategy to the feeling and the intensity of the feeling is the way to go in terms of like what works for me when I'm angry may not work for me when I'm anxious
Yep. Yep.
and
And I think,
helping. Go ahead.
yeah. Well, and just like trusting one's intuition on that. And then in my world, trusting teenagers on that. What they're going to need one day is going to be different from another, and they go to it very intuitively. I am a big fan of the Will This Matter Next Week? Ethan Cross, whose work I like so much, has done such beautiful work on the ways in which we can ask kids, how do you think you'll feel about this 2 weeks from now, a year from now, right? And how powerful that is at shifting
Hmm.
one's perspective.
Yeah, I find that very useful. Another, just as I'm thinking, one of my other go-to strategies, and this is for more when I'm feeling maybe something has gone wrong in the with what I'm doing, or I'm just so overly focused on something that maybe didn't go well, is I jump in a hot air balloon
Mm.
and I just look down and I'm like, oh, but your partner loves you, your dogs love you, your family loves you. Like this one person doesn't like you. It's life happens. People don't like everybody.
Mhm.
But you know how like when you get a strong emotion, your focus tends to narrow. And so what I like about the hot air balloon is I get up in it and I just look down. I'm like, oh, my life is bigger than this one relationship or this one. You know, you do a lot of public speaking like I do, and I gave a speech last night, and I probably shouldn't say this on camera, but whatever. It didn't end till 9:30, and
Mm.
it was like a businessy thing, and I had a glass of wine, and I was like standing up there drinking, doing a Q&A for an hour. And I'm like, this might be the first time I've done a Q&A with a glass of wine, but whatever. Uh, and I said, I was a little like, light on my feet.
Yeah, little
Um,
things.
I mean, I was not off base, but I said one thing that I was like, gosh, I probably shouldn't have said that. And of course, the whole ride home, I'm obsessing
Yep,
about that.
yep.
And then I got in my head, I believe, I'm like, Mark, you spoke for an hour. You said 15,000 things. That one thing, you're the only one who noticed it.
Yep. No,
And so,
it's hard. But I think I will tell you, if I wouldn't vanquish these experiences if I could, because they remind us like this is just what it means to be a person. And that you can study this stuff, you can have such good therapy, you can do all of these things. This is just the nature of life. And there have been times, often when books are coming out, I'll get very, very anxious, very, very anxious. Like I'll do an interview and then I'll just get obsessed about one thing I said and sure that it's horrible and it's going to destroy my career. And, like, I mean, it just, really scary stuff. But it feels so real. It
totally.
feels so
Well,
real.
it is real.
It's real. It's not true, but it's real. And as miserable as those moments are for me, they make me a better clinician.
Yeah.
Because then when I am caring for a person who's like, but I am sure, I really know what they mean when they say, like, I am sure this is as bad as it feels. And um, so I think, the goal here is to not um, not miss the lessons
Good
in
point.
our own pain and discomfort and turn that into better utility for the people we care for.
I love that. So, as we wrap our time together, I always like to ask one question, which is just take a moment and imagine a world where everyone gets the emotion education that we believe they need, that research shows is beneficial. And so, if you just take that moment and imagine, it's 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and people really have gotten this comprehensive education about emotions, their value. They've learned evidence-based strategies to support them and managing them to their best potential. What do you see as being different about the world we're living in right now?
I think there'd be a lot more compassion. I think that when I see how mean and cruel people can sometimes be, I have a really double reaction. Part of me is appalled. And then part of me thinks, who did not take care of you in the way you deserved? Who didn't hear you? Who didn't let you feel something? And who wasn't tender with you? So now you can't be tender with other people. So for me, it has major societal implications for how we conduct a civil society.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you're doing. It's so important.
Yeah, that was awesome. I really appreciated the time.